Okay, Demofest team, we're going to give everyone about another minute or so to start joining as the other sessions are just wrapping up. So hang tight. Give us one more minute. And while we wait, in the chat, post where you're from. Where's everyone? I see some familiar faces of people. So where are you representing today? Right off the bat, Austin, Charlotte, North Carolina, Jersey, UK. Oh, we got people all over. SLC, Patrick, we're not far. Pennsylvania, Portland, Columbia. Beautiful.
Nice.
You have got an international crowd, my friend.
Australia, I love it.
Chile.
Oh, thanks, Rebecca. I love that comment. Love you too.
Greg's a mile down the road from Carrie's house. Okay, nice.
Cool.
Love it.
Greg,
all right.
Close. We'll have to hook up.
Yes. 2 a.m. in the morning. So that's dedication.
Hard, you're a trooper. Love it.
Okay, let me kill this audio here. Well, team, welcome to today's session, and thank you for joining us. This session is the demo agenda, how one slide can make or break your demo with Carrie Sokolsky. My name is Alex Edwards. I'm the Vice President of Client Success here at Consensus, and I will be your moderator for today's session. Demofest is presented by Consensus, and Consensus is intelligent demo automation software that helps you scale pre-sales with interactive video demos. You can learn more at goconsensus.com. Also, Consensus has provided this event free of charge to all attendees. However, we would like to invite you to donate to our company's humanitarian organizations if you would like to do so. You can learn more about this and donate via the link in the reception or visit our expo hall and check out our Demofest Gives Back booth. I've also put the link in chat and tagged at the top there if you want quick access to it. Now, we encourage you to participate in today's session. On the right-hand side of your console, you can see a few ways that you can engage with us. As we're already doing right now in the chat function, feel free to provide any commentary there, engage with other attendees. If you drop a question in that chat, chances are I'm going to copy it and just drop it in the Q&A section. So don't be offended if I do that. But we also just want to make sure that you know that there is a dedicated QA section. So drop your questions down there and we'll make sure that we get to those as well. There will be polls in this session. So there is another tab up there that will allow you to be able to participate in that poll, and we would encourage you to do so, as we'd love to get that feedback. And then at the end of this session, we're going to be taking questions. So definitely use that Q&A as I had mentioned before. All right. Last but not least, if you have any technical issues, please click on your profile in the upper right-hand corner and click Get Support. Someone will reach out to you to make sure we troubleshoot. Now, I'd like to introduce our speaker. Carrie is the founder and president of Presales Mastery, helping pre-sales organizations improve their demo performance through personalized one-on-one coaching using a comprehensive 95-metric demo performance best practices framework. Carrie has over 15 years of global pre-sales and sales enablement leadership experience. He is also the founder of CEDO, the Toronto chapter of SE Nation, and co-founder with Chris White of the Presales Solutions Buyer Guide, which was an awesome session yesterday. So with that, I'd like to turn the time over to you, Carrie. Take it away.
Thanks so much, Alex. Let me share my screen here. All right, just a quick check. Can everyone let me know if you can see my screen, or somebody let me know?
You look great. Yep.
Fantastic. All right, so excuse me, let's kick this off. So first off, thanks for the intro, Alex. Good morning, good afternoon, and apparently good evening. Harm, amazing that you're up at 2 a.m. in the morning for this. We are recording this, so if you do get tired, feel free to drop off and we'll make sure you still see it. But I do want to thank you all for joining us. I know you have a lot of options in terms of which sessions to attend, so really thrilled that you chose to do this one. Looks like we got a pretty good turnout, 120 or so. So let's kick into it. So this wouldn't be much of a webinar on using a demo agenda slide if I didn't have an agenda slide. So here you go. I'm going to start by explaining why I decided to spend an entire webinar talking about agenda slides and why a verbal agenda slide isn't quite the same as an actual slide. We'll then get into the meat of things. I'm going to provide 10 reasons why you should consider using a demo agenda slide in all of your demos. And we'll follow that up with a few considerations to think about when you're dealing with agendas that are supplied by the prospects, like for a structured POC or an RFP deep dive. And then finally, we're going to cover some tips on how to get the most out of your demo agendas, and we'll finish up without some Q&A. So let's jump into it. All right, so first off, you may have noticed that this session is a bit different than your typical Demofest presentations. Most of the sessions this year and in previous years have tended to focus on strategic and theoretical topics, all of which are incredibly valuable in their own rights, but not necessarily subjects that you can immediately walk away from with a new tool to put in your bag of demo tricks. So when I was talking to John and Garen at Consensus about what I wanted to present this year, I mentioned that I wanted to provide attendees with some tactical advice that you could put into practice in your next demo tomorrow or whenever it is and get some positive results right away. So then I had to think about what that might be. I coach demos for a living, so I'm constantly dishing out very specific feedback to SEs on how they can improve their demo delivery and execution. And as part of that, as Alex mentioned, I score every demo on an almost 100 metric demo best practices scorecard. And I also happen to track the scores for every demo I've ever coached. So what I did was I decided to mine the data and find some of the metrics that SEs scored the worst on in their initial coach demos. And there were a few candidates, but the use of a detailed demo agenda stood out as one of the weakest performing metrics. And before I tell you how it scored, I'd love to take a poll of the audience to see how everyone here compares to that. So what I'm going to do, if we head over to the poll tab in your thing, I've just published a poll. You should be able to see it now. Alex, can you confirm that that's showing up?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so what I'd like to know is how many of you use a detailed demo agenda slide in your demos? And just so we're all on the same page, a demo agenda slide is not the meeting agenda where your sales rep probably has a one-word bullet for demo. I'm referring to the separate slide that explains in detail what's going to be covered during the demo portion of the meeting. So far, we have no votes, it looks like. Oh, no, sorry, we do. I'm looking at the wrong tab. Okay, so always amazing, 28%, occasionally 40, nice. Infrequently 15, and never 17. Okay, so that's not entirely misaligned with what I found. From comparison, a third of my clients, or only about 35%, use a demo agenda slide on the first demo that they submit for coaching. Obviously, I coach them to do that, and so subsequent demos, they tend to raise that percentage. But interestingly, demos with a demo agenda slide score 22% higher overall on my scorecard than demos that don't use one. So demo agenda slides aren't too commonly used, and the data shows that they do somewhat correlate to a better overall demo, but why are they really so important? Well, if we believe that the prospect sales experience is a large driver in determining whether we win or lose a deal, then consider what the prospect's experience is without a demo agenda. Imagine an acquaintance invites you out to dinner at a restaurant you know nothing about. What's the first thing that we probably do? We go check out the menu online, maybe we read some customer reviews. Ultimately, we want to know if the place is any good and whether they have any food we're going to want to eat. Now, suppose the restaurant doesn't have a website or a Facebook page or an Instagram account, and there are no reviews available on it anywhere. How enthusiastic would you be to go? Maybe not so much, but let's say for the sake of argument, you take a chance and you show up. Maybe you're really hungry. So you get to the restaurant and surprise, there's no menus. It's a set tasting menu where the chef decides every dish for you, and you don't find out what those dishes are until they show up at the table. Oh, and by the way, it's $350 per person. Now, I realize this scenario may actually appeal to some folks, but for most of us, this scenario would likely inspire more apprehension and potential disappointment than anticipation and enthusiasm. And ultimately, that's what a demo without an agenda slide does for your prospects. Yes, they know they're going to see an ERP or a CRM or whatever type of product you offer, but they don't know if they're going to see or learn about what's really important to them, or if they're going to be bored to death with irrelevant features and topics that they don't really care about. They're essentially flying blind. A demo agenda slide solves that problem and can help your demo be infinitely more successful in a slew of other ways that we're going to cover today. So yes, an entire agenda about one slide. And incidentally, and totally unrelated, if you do a Google search for "you're kidding, right?" it is absolutely depressing how many of those memes spell "your" as Y-O-U-R. And my favorite part of this clip happens to be Emily Blunt at the bottom mouthing "yep" after Jim Carrey says "you're kidding, right?" All right, so let's dig into it. So if an agenda is so important, why does it have to be on a slide? Can't we just tell the audience what we plan to cover? I'm going to give you 3 reasons why a slide is often a better approach. First, visuals are more memorable. There's a Chinese proverb that says, "I hear and I forget, I see and I remember." And apparently the science agrees. Studies show that auditory or hearing memory is reliable for immediate recall, but visual memory is much more effective for retrieving information stored in our long-term memory. In our brains, visual memory has a direct path to storage, but auditory memory has to make various synaptic pit stops to reach its destination before the memory can be stored. And so recall and recognition from hearing things tends to be weaker than when you see them. Simply put, chances are you're not going to remember what your spouse asked you to bring home from the grocery store when they call you, but you will if you saw it in a text. And by extension, your audience will retain what they see on a visual agenda more effectively than if they just hear it. Second, visuals simplify validation. In most cases, we cover a lot of information in our demos. Describing the agenda to an audience is great, but just hearing it makes it harder for them to determine if it's the right agenda for them. By seeing the agenda on paper or on your slide, not only will it be easier for them to determine if something's missing, they'll better be able to determine if everything you plan to show them is actually useful or relevant for them. And third, we need to win every impression with our audiences. The best product doesn't always win. The cheapest product doesn't always win. Deals are more often won by the sales experience, or perhaps more accurately today, the buying experience that your prospect has with us. As a pre-sales leader, I always coach my team to go the extra mile. Early in my sales career, I was taught to win every meeting. And these days, we often get engaged with our clients much later in the sales cycle, so it's more important than ever that we win every meeting with them. But I'll take that concept 2 steps further. The first is to not just win every meeting, but win every interaction with your audience. Sometimes you're interacting with a prospect without actually meeting with them. You're emailing a requested or useful asset. You're creating an auto demo for them. We need to win every interaction, and that means doing it better than the competition. And then to take it even 1 step further, don't just win every interaction, win every impression. If 9 out of your 10 slides are perfect, but 1 has a typo or has the logo from your last demo's prospect rather than the current one you're talking to, would we consider that a great deck? Probably not. If your POC demo was perfect except for 1 key report that totally missed the mark, what then? It takes a lot to win credibility with our prospects, but it only takes 1 big slip up to lose it. So we need to put our best foot forward and win every impression with them. A verbal agenda can seem like you're winging it, but a formal written agenda can give the audience the impression that you've prepared extensively for their presentation. For some or all of your competitors, they're going to do that, so why shouldn't you as well? Okay, so let's get into why we should use a demo agenda. I always ask my coaching clients 5 questions for context before I coach one of their demos. One of those questions is pretty fundamental. What are the prospect's goals for the meeting? Incredibly, the answer is all too often either they don't know or just some generalized assumption. And whether you know ahead of time or not, agenda slides provide a great opportunity to clarify the prospect's issues, objectives, and concerns. A few things to think about here. First, it's not almost always going to be preferable to clarify these things up front rather than mid-demo. During our demos, we never want an audience to say to us, that's okay, you can move on. It's not really relevant for us. We want to make sure we're doing the right stuff before we get into our demo. Second, things change. You had a great discovery call 2 weeks ago in preparation for the demo. You learned everything you needed to know to prepare, but it's always possible that things have changed since then. And an agenda gives you a great way to uncover if that's the case. And then consider that demos usually have larger audiences than discovery calls, including new folks who probably weren't part of the discovery session or whose input wasn't properly conveyed by those who were. Have you ever been in a demo and you didn't interact with that silent person in the corner, or in today's Zoom age, the one who was on mute and had their camera off all meeting, only to find out that they were the ultimate decision maker? Hopefully we can all agree that it's worth understanding the perspectives of each and every audience member to ensure we're fully capturing the prospect's complete set of needs and can address each buying team member's priorities. But what's the best way to do that? Well, the demo agenda slide is a great excuse to find out. Most sales rep introductions at the start of meetings are pretty simple. Tell us your name and your role. And while getting names is critical because it allows us to directly reference those folks later in the demo, which is a solid tool to keep or recapture their attention, it's not enough to make sure you're going to win the meeting for each participant. Consider either telling the AE to do this during your intros or do it when you get to your demo agenda slide. Ask each individual to tell you why they're in the room. I like to preface it with, before we jump into the agenda, I just want to make sure I'm addressing everyone's unique perspective, especially those of you who weren't in our discovery call. Can each of you take a few seconds just to tell us the top 2 to 3 things you're looking to get out of today's meeting, or the top issues you're looking to solve? And while this may eat up a few extra minutes of time, doing so can potentially surface new issues that you may not have been exposed to previously, and which you can then address when you're in your demo. Okay, so demo agendas are a great way to validate the demo with your audience from a few perspectives. The first is an extension of clarifying the issues, and that is validating that there's alignment on the buying team. Unfortunately, it's not uncommon for project managers to not fully inform their teams ahead of a demo in terms of either why they're there or what they're going to see. Because of that, we can't assume that everyone knows in advance what the agenda or purpose of the meeting is, even if the agenda came directly from the prospect. If that's the case, the audience may not have the proper context with which to properly evaluate what you're going to show. An agenda slide allows you to avoid any confusion or misalignment by making sure everyone is fully clear on what's going to be shown and why. Second, and I can't stress this enough, demos should be about the prospect and what they want or need to see, not about you and what you want to show. The demo agenda gives us an opportunity to validate that everything we plan to show is important or relevant for the audience and that we're avoiding anything that isn't. The last thing we want to do is put our audience to sleep by showing stuff they didn't want to see or that isn't a priority for them. Third, we just talked about how things can change from discovery to demo, but buyers are busy with their day jobs and evaluating your solution probably isn't the only thing on their minds. Because of that, depending on how stretched out your sales cycle is, people can forget things. An agenda slide can help facilitate a quick recap of what you've already shown some of the audience members in previous demos to jog their memory, but it can also inform new audience members of what's already been covered, so you can determine if anything needs to be shown again. Okay, so reason number 3 brings us to the last way your agenda should be validated: for completeness. How many of you have found out after a loss review that the prospect didn't see something they were hoping to? An agenda slide is a great way to help the audience confirm if anything is missing from the agenda to ensure you never lose a demo for not showing something. I mentioned earlier how using an agenda slide makes it easier for the audience to identify if anything is missing from the agenda versus just hearing the agenda verbally. But there's another challenge to asking the audience if anything is missing. Audiences don't know what they don't know. On a recent demo I was coaching, the SE asked the prospect what else they wanted to see. Their answer, well, not knowing what else there is to go through, I can't really say. It was the perfect indicator why, without a detailed agenda, the prospect often can't effectively answer the question about what else is important. Which brings us to the next point. Have you ever felt you had too much to show and had to cut stuff out? We've all been there when we expected to have 45 minutes, but the sales rep spent 20 minutes on their slides, and now we've only got 30 minutes to demo. Or we knew we wanted 60 minutes, but the prospect only gave us 30. There's an easy way around that if you use a demo agenda slide. Include a separate section for topics that are not under consideration, either because they're not top priorities or because there isn't enough time to cover them. It's basically showing the prospect the full menu of possible topics and capabilities, even though you're only showing some of them that day. And doing that can serve three purposes. It can help the prospect identify other possible topics they may want to include that they hadn't considered or wouldn't consider had they not seen them. It ensures that you're not eliminated from contention for not showing something the audience assumed your solution didn't have or couldn't do. Even if you don't show it, at least they know you have it. And third, it can pique interest in a possible follow-up session. In most organizations I've been in, we've run sales ops metrics on win rate compared to the number of times the prospect was exposed to our product. In every case, the more the prospect saw our solution, the higher our win rate was. The other topic section on an agenda slide can act as a teaser to entice the prospect to want to re-engage with you. All right, so in general, people tend to focus on the issues most important to them. When someone isn't sure if you're going to cover their specific hot button topics, they can get concerned or distracted or even completely tune out, which is unfortunately easier to do on remote meetings when the cameras are turned off. Using an agenda slide, you can preset expectations in terms of everything that's going to be covered and when. So no one in the audience has to worry that they're not going to see what they need to. And you don't have to worry that the audience is more focused on something you haven't yet shown or just completely tuned out. Oops, a little too fast there. The other nice thing is that letting the audience know when you'll cover each topic in the demo has another more obvious benefit. And that is it can avoid those pesky off-topic questions that threaten to derail your demo flow or risk annoying someone by asking them to basically defer their question to later in the demo. By seeing a detailed agenda up front, everyone's going to be much clearer about when those topics that are important to them are going to be covered, which typically leads them to saving their questions for the appropriate time in the demo. So reason number 5 is a simple but obvious one. We've all been there. We get paired up with a sales rep who thinks they're paid based on the number of slides in their deck, resulting in an inevitable audience death by PowerPoint. Unfortunately, we're then tasked with resuscitating the audience's attention. The good news is people tend to snap back into focus when there's a speaker change. The bad news is you're going to have a very limited time to intrigue them enough to keep that attention. A demo agenda slide can act like smelling salts, though, to bring the audience back to life. By showing everyone that you're going to address all of their key issues and pain points that they care about, they now have a reason to pay attention. Even better, providing some insight into the prospective benefits they'll realize by including those in the agenda can instill a sense of anticipation to get the audience even more enthused about what's to come. Now, I should point out here that I'm often asked about the irony of offering up yet another slide to an audience that's already seen too many of them. And my response to that is, it's less about the number of slides and more about the slide content. Hopefully you're effectively partnering with your sales counterparts, and part of your demo prep process involves not only reviewing and providing feedback on your demo content, but also any slides that are going to be presented. Chris White talks a lot about effective sales and pre-sales partnering and had an awesome session yesterday about that very topic. If you missed it, I highly suggest you check it out in the recordings. For the likely very few of you unfamiliar with it, Tell, Show, Tell is a demo concept most commonly popularized by Demo to Win. The idea is that repetition and proper context is key to helping people understand and remember new concepts. There's a lot of research showing that repetition improves both semantic and episodic memory. Semantic memory refers to general world knowledge that we accumulate throughout our lives, but episodic memory is the ability to recall and mentally re-experience specific events from your past. For example, your 30th birthday party or that amazing session you attended at Demofest. For your prospects, it refers to how they'll remember that demo you gave them. When people hear things for the first time or in isolation, they don't necessarily resonate. But if we repeatedly tell our prospects that our solution is going to provide some specific benefit, that connection starts to stick. The Tell, Show, Tell method implies that you tell the audience what you're going to show them and the benefits they'll realize from it. Then you show it to them, and then you re-articulate those benefits. An agenda slide effectively accomplishes the first part of that, telling the audience what they're going to see during the demo and why it should matter to them. Ultimately, we're looking to be more memorable to our prospects. From their perspective, they're taking in a ton of information about our company and our solution, but it's not just us. They're likely evaluating multiple vendors, and that just multiplies the deluge of information that's being thrown at them, making it even harder to remember for them to remember each solution. So we need to be memorable. Stories are one of the best ways to be memorable because they evoke emotions, which people tend to remember more than facts, but ultimately repetition is key. I used to advertise on the radio when I owned a sports management company before I got into pre-sales. And at the time, research showed that most people need to hear a radio ad 7 times before they finally process it. The first 6 times, it's just background noise. The same concept applies to our demos. We need to stick out and be memorable, and using an agenda as the first iteration of Tell, Show, Tell is one way to do that. Okay, so reason number 7, time management. We can probably all agree that this is a fairly common challenge for pre-sales. We're almost never getting as much time as we'd like. In yesterday morning's keynote, Alistair talked about how buyer attention spans continue to get smaller, and it's incumbent upon us to optimize the time we do get with our prospects. I'd love to do one last poll here. So if you click on the poll tab, I'm going to promote one other poll for us. And what I want to, it should be up now. What I'd like to know is how often time becomes an issue in your demos. Let me just make sure you can see the results. You can, okay, good. So either you had to cut out content because that you intended to show, or you ended up having to rush through topics way faster than you liked, or you didn't have time for Q&A even, right? How often is time an issue in your demos? Okay, so very often, about a fifth, often. So about half of you, it's either often or very often, occasionally or rarely for the rest. So half of you are doing a pretty good job of managing time, but half of us are running out of time for demos. That's a challenge. For reference, in the demos that I coach, about 17% completely run out of time and don't cover anything on the agenda. So agendas can help with time management in a number of ways. The first and probably most obvious is that they can help you prioritize how much time to spend on each demo section based on what's most important to the audience. I talked earlier about validating your agenda topics for relevance, which can save us a ton of time by allowing us to avoid any topics that the prospect indicates aren't relevant or important. But by understanding which topics are most important to the audience, you can adjust your timing and demo flow to cover the most important topics first and spend the most time on them. That way, if you do run out of time, it's often the less critical topics that are covered in less detail or skipped entirely. Incidentally, in the demos I coach, 21% spend either too much or too little time on certain topics based on their relative importance. Now, regardless of how well we plan our demos and prioritize timing based on importance, demos can take on a life of their own. Super engaged audiences asking lots of questions often eats up time that we budget for other topics. In most demos I watch, it usually isn't until there's less than 10 minutes left in the meeting that someone calls out that there's limited time left, which is often too late to effectively cover the rest of the demo content. As SEs, we're usually heads down. We're focused on the demo at hand, but hopefully we have our sales counterparts in the meeting with us, and this is one of the ways that our AEs should be helping out during the demo. By assigning expected times to each of our demo sections, even if we only communicate that to our team internally versus putting it on the public agenda, it becomes easier for the AE to identify and call out if you're running behind much earlier, which gives you the flexibility to much more easily course correct. When we do run short on time, what do most of us do? We try to plow through the remaining topics as quickly as possible, usually with ineffective messaging because we're rushing, and by making our solutions look much more complex because we're racing through lots of screens at once. So let me suggest a better option when you find yourself in this situation. Consider asking the audience how they'd best like to use the remaining time. The easiest way to do that is to bring up your demo agenda, recap what topics are still outstanding, and then ask the audience, which ones they'd like to cover with the time left. Not to beat a dead horse, but I'm going to anyways. Your demos should be about the audience and what they want to see. So one important tip to consider with time management, and incredibly only 2% of the first demos that I coach do this. Almost no one does this. Before you even start reviewing your agenda at the start of the demo, if your AE hasn't already done so, consider confirming how much time you have and ask if anyone has a hard stop. It's possible that the amount of time you thought you had isn't accurate, either because the audience needs to leave early for another meeting that they have right afterwards, or in the rare cases, you may actually find that they can stay longer than the scheduled time, which can give you added flexibility. Either way, you're going to have a much better idea of exactly how much time to spend on each topic if you know with certainty up front how much time you have available. The second thing to consider clarifying is whether anyone has a hard stop or has to step out of the meeting at any point. If they do, find out when, so that you're able to reconfigure your demo flow to make sure you're addressing those topics most important for that individual while they're in the room. This is obviously incredibly critical for executives and decision makers. Even if you're following Pierre Cohen's do the last thing first methodology, that last or best thing may be different for each individual, which is another reason why it's important to understand each audience member's key issues. So number 8 is a simple one, and hopefully it hasn't happened to you, but it's not that uncommon in longer demos or those that have a large agenda. I was in a demo I was coaching the other day, and the SE had a fully planned out day in the life demo flow that covered 4 different end user personas, followed by an admin demo to show how everything was configured in the solution. At the end of the 3rd end user persona, in response to an audience question, she started to switch gears to show the admin portion of the demo. Now, luckily, she switched back to PowerPoint to show her agenda slide to recap for them what she was going to show in that part of the demo. And it was at that point she realized she hadn't yet shown the 4th end user persona. Like I said, we're usually heads down in our demos, and it's easy to lose the forest for the trees. Audiences ask questions, they take you into unplanned territory, priorities change mid-meeting. Agendas can act as a grounding of sorts, kind of like our home base, to remind us what we plan to show and help ensure we don't miss anything. So after an hour of drinking from the fire hose, people can forget stuff. Some of you may have heard of the primacy recency effect. It's the observation that information presented at the beginning and the end of a learning episode tends to be retained better than information presented in the middle. Anecdotally, that seems to make sense. When you're in a meeting, when do you pay the most attention? Most of us are all ears at the beginning when our patience and attention spans haven't yet been exhausted, and at the very end, when the promise of freedom recaptures our attention. It's also probably why only half of you are going to remember this particular slide. And it's another example of why reminding the audience about what you showed and summarizing key points at the end of your demo is so valuable. As mentioned earlier, visual memory is more effective than auditory memory. So bringing up your agenda slide at the end of the demo while you recap your key benefits and value props can further help the audience remember that information and everything else you covered. In doing so, your agenda effectively helps reinforce the second tell in Tell, Show, Tell. Bringing up the agenda slide at the end can also help identify any items that may need to be followed up on or covered in a subsequent demo. It's effectively a natural segue into a parking lot review to make sure you haven't missed or misinterpreted any follow-up items that came up during the meeting. And it's a great opportunity to confirm priorities, set due dates, and assign owners to each of those tasks to make sure they get addressed in a timely manner. So it's no secret that prospects prefer to buy from trusted experts, and it's never too early to demonstrate your expertise. A detailed demo agenda that correctly and thoroughly references a prospect's key challenges and objectives and helps outline how your solution is going to address them tells the audience right up front that you've captured their requirements in detail, that you understand them, and that you're going to address each of them during the demo. It effectively gets you off on the right foot. If you have a solution that is inarguably better than your competitors, Congratulations. You're one of the very few who live in what I like to call the pre-sales promised land. For most of us, though, product alone doesn't win the deal, and we need to differentiate wherever we can. We talked about winning into every interaction with the prospect, and a detailed agenda slide is one way to do that. We saw earlier that not everybody uses these demo agendas. Hopefully, you're looking to gain any possible edge over your competitors, and this is one way to do that. Okay, so everything we've covered so far addresses agendas in general, but agendas provided by the prospect, commonly used for structured POCs or RFP demos, present some unique challenges. Two of the biggest are also the most obvious: scope and flow. Prospects usually don't know how our solutions work, and they certainly don't know how they're most effectively demoed. They also either don't know and often don't care about how much time is required to configure or customize our solution to meet all of their requirements. And because of that, these agendas tend to be incredibly wide in scope. They essentially ask for the kitchen sink. And they're frequently organized by what the prospect assumes are reasonable groupings of topics and tasks, but that often has zero correlation to what is a logical demo flow based on how our solution actually works. Because of that, here are a few things to consider when you get them. First, don't be afraid to modify the agenda by consolidating duplicate items and reorganizing the flow to best suit your product. A prospect may ask to see 7 different workflows in your solution, but if each workflow is configured and handled the same way, it may make sense for you to only show 1 or 2 during the demo. Obviously, it'll save you a lot of time too. One technique I've used successfully is to ask the project manager or the internal champion whether they would agree that if you can handle the 1 or 2 most complex workflows, would that convince them that the solution can also handle the easier ones? Most of the time, they'll say yes. Now, if you do decide to modify the agenda, make sure you do the following few things. First, definitely get buy-in from the project manager that it's okay to do this in advance. And that means well before the day of the demo. Second, if you're going to consolidate repetitive items, ask the project manager to indicate which is the most complex rather than deciding yourself. Third, and especially if you modify the agenda order to improve the flow, make it very clear to the project manager how you're going to ensure that the demo participants will know which original agenda items are being addressed at any given time. And finally, on demo day, when you're reviewing the agenda with your audience, explain that you received permission from the project manager to reorganize it and that they've okayed this new version. That way the audience isn't going to think that you unilaterally decided to change it. If you do modify the agenda, make sure you call out which original agenda items you're covering at any given time so that it's easier for the audience to fill out any vendor scorecards they might have. This is usually going to require you to cross-reference the original agenda against the new one, but it's better that you do that work than assume the audience will either be able to or want to do it themselves. This next item can sound a little odd, but when reviewing the agenda, consider informing the audience that it was provided by them. I talked earlier about buyer team misalignment. I've been in a lot of POCs where not all the participants were familiar with the agenda ahead of time. If someone thinks it's a poor agenda, you don't want them to blame you for that. And finally, after you've completed each topic or section in your demo, let the audience know and then have them validate that you've adequately satisfied that set of requirements before moving on. Once you get verbal buy-in from a prospect that you've covered everything to their satisfaction, it becomes much harder for them psychologically to later score you negatively on. Okay, so we've talked a lot about why demo agendas are important and some POC considerations. Let's switch gears and cover some tips on how best to implement your demo agenda slides. If you want to save some time and ensure your agenda is as close to what the prospect wants before you even get to the demo, consider emailing your agenda to them a few days before the meeting and ask them what they think. Is everything they're looking for included? Are all the topics useful for them? You may only get feedback from the project manager, but that's better than no feedback at all. Your AE probably can't put this together for you, nor should they. The demo agenda slide should ideally not only be created by you, the SE, it should absolutely be delivered by you, regardless of who delivers the other slides in the presentation. AEs will rarely have the full context with which to create or communicate exactly what's going to be covered in the demo or why. As much as we'd all love our sales counterparts to be more useful in our demos, asking them to own the demo agenda slide usually isn't a good way to do that. So this one sounds obvious, but it's commonly missed. Similar to our demos, consider using plain language without any jargon. Avoid your product names or any other terms specific to your company that may not be familiar for your audience. Remember too, the deck may also be distributed after the meeting, including the people that may not have been present for the demo. It needs to be inherently understandable by someone who has zero exposure to or understanding of your solution. So we all know the cardinal rule of demos. Avoid generic demos at all costs so that they're more relatable, relevant, and easier to understand for the prospect. The same holds true for the demo agenda slide. Add the prospect's logo to make it seem even more focused on them. And while it's important to avoid our own jargon, definitely use the prospect's corporate and industry terms and verbiage to show that you understand their business. So hopefully you're not delivering feature functions, spray and pray type demos, and are instead leading with typical value messaging to explain how your solution is going to address their key issues and benefits that they'll realize. But the same should be true for your agendas. We mentioned earlier the agenda can act as the first tell in the tell, show, tell method. And from that perspective, it too should focus on the business issues and benefits rather than just calling out features or modules you're going to cover. So for example, an audience is much more likely to get excited about an agenda item that says, accelerate, simplify, and streamline broken sign-off processes through automated approvals than they are if it just says workflow module. I mentioned the end of demo summary earlier, but despite it's important, that tends to be one of the first things that gets dropped when demos run low on time. Adding a slot for the summary at the end of your actual agenda with a set time allotted for it not only sets the expectation with the audience that you're going to actually do a summary at the end, but it also helps you budget your overall time to ensure you have time left for it when you finish. No one likes to read an essay on the slide. If you have too much content on one slide, consider breaking it up by demo section or by persona or whatever else you use to logically organize your demo. If you do this, don't forget to show each agenda slide before and after the relevant section it belongs to. So we talked earlier about this. If your AE isn't asking the audience during their initial intros and you don't feel comfortable interjecting at that point, use your demo agenda as an excuse to find out why everyone's there. Try not to be married to your agenda. Even the best agendas are going to get modified mid-flight if you're following all of these steps and asking the audience to prioritize and validate accordingly. If after talking to the prospect, it's clear that what you've proposed, either in flow or timing, isn't ideal for them, consider rearranging to suit. I can't say this enough. It's all about them, not about you. If you're in a competitive sales cycle and you're going late or last in comparison to the other vendors, when you validate your agenda with the prospect, consider explicitly asking if there were any additional topics covered with the other vendors that aren't listed, but that would be helpful to cover. Some prospects will proactively call these things out, but others might not. By asking, you ensure you get a chance to address anything your competitors have discussed. So this one applies to any and all slides you're presenting, not just the agenda, but please have them in presentation or full screen mode. 3 obvious reasons. 1, it just looks better and more professional than seeing your slide sorter and your notes and anything else that might be showing. 2, it makes it easier for everyone to read. The text and graphics are going to be maximized. And 3, it avoids any possible distractions. When the slide sorter is up, people's attention can be drawn to their slides. And unfortunately, more than once, I've seen it where slide notes that clearly weren't appropriate for audience consumption appeared on screen, leading to some fairly awkward moments. And again, like any other slide, please do not read your agendas verbatim. Instead, consider paraphrasing and elaborating what's written. Your slide should ideally have the minimum number of words possible to get the point across. So one objection that I hear when I suggest using a demo agenda slide is that there simply isn't enough time to create one for each demo. I'm absolutely sensitive to time issues, knowing full well that many sales teams overextend their pre-sales counterparts and often don't respect our calendars by doing things like booking back-to-back demos. But a demo agenda slide shouldn't take you more than a few minutes to prepare. One way to short circuit the time required is to create a set of agenda templates by product, by topic, by persona or industry, or any other common segmentation scheme that applies to your particular business or solution. That way, you'll only have to spend a few minutes modifying a template rather than creating it from scratch each time. So presumably a lot of these tips are pretty obvious, but hopefully they've given you a few ideas on how to optimally include and execute a demo agenda slide. If anyone is looking for a sample agenda slide to use, please send me a message on LinkedIn or email me at carrie@presalesmastery.com, and I will be happy to send one over. Okay, so we talked about why using a slide is a better approach than just verbally describing your demo agenda. We covered 10 reasons why you should consider using a demo agenda slide, including that they help clarify and validate issues, they set expectations, they energize and focus your audience, they help you manage time, they eliminate any negative consequences for content that isn't shown, and they ensure your audience remembers your key messaging. We discussed some considerations specific to POCs or other prospect-created agendas, and finally, some best practices tips for ensuring your agendas can be as effective as possible. I hope I've convinced some of you to try this out on your next demo if you're not already doing it, and given you the tools to do so effectively. If you do try it out and you haven't before, please send me a note. I'd love to know how it went. And with that, happy to open it up for some questions.
Carrie, thank you so much for this session. It has been, for me, I can't speak for everyone else, but for me, it's been eye-opening and has made me reconsider the way I look at agendas. So I have loved this session. We have a lot of great questions as well. So let's dive into those right now. The first one was asked by my friend Marta, and thank you, James, for putting this in the Q&A. This was from one of the very early stats, so you may have to draw upon the memory there, but it says, can we have the stat again at the end for percentage difference with demo agenda versus no demo agenda? She would like to quote that for her team.
Yeah, for sure. So in my scorecard, 22% higher results overall in the demo for those that used agenda slides versus ones that didn't, which is pretty substantial.
Awesome. Okay. Next one on the list. This is from Greg. Do you see a difference in effectiveness between bullet point agendas versus graphical flows?
Oh, interesting. What I see as most effective actually is when they are superimposed together. Okay. You know, the whole idea that we remember stuff better visually, flows are really effective for that. And what I've seen really effective is when you superimpose some of those bullets over those flows. Now, obviously, it can get a little complicated in that situation, so you got to be careful you're not overcomplicating the slide. But I would say if you can find a way to do both together, that's usually the most effective.
Awesome. Okay, next question here from Jacob. How do you feel about utilizing video in your slides? I find it helpful to sales to drive high-level overviews so the SE can jump into more technical presentations.
Yeah, so I don't know that's specific to agendas, but happy to give you my thoughts on it. You know, the proprietors of this conference Consensus, I'm sure can tell you a lot about how video is super effective. And I think there was actually a couple of interesting demo sessions about that. I think video can be really effective. I think the challenge, like everything else, is it can't be too long. If you're in a live presentation, the last thing the audience wants is to be subjected to some really long canned video when you can probably or hopefully deliver that just as effectively live. So if you are going to use it, my suggestion would be to do it sparingly.
Yeah, well, I'd say we took a study of our last 2021 top 20 accounts, and their average view time was 4 minutes and 45 seconds. Doesn't matter if it was a 20-minute video or a 5-minute video. That was the average for everyone. So I love the idea of keeping that short. Okay, one from my friend Dominic here. Would we be able to share your slide deck, or would you be able to share your slide deck?
Yeah, happy to. Dominic, send me an email, carrie@presalesmastery.com, and I'm happy to fire it off to you. and anyone else, obviously, as well.
Awesome. Okay. Looks like it said thoughts on slide automations when appropriate.
So by automations, I'm hoping that you meant animations. If I'm misinterpreting, please put in the chat if I am, so I can clarify. So you saw I used a few in this one. I think they are helpful. I think if anything, what it does is especially when you've got more content on the slide than less, it helps focus the audience's attention. Our tendency when we see something new on a screen, whether it's a slide or a new demo screen in the demo, is to absorb everything we're looking at first. And what that tends to do is distract us from whatever's being messaged to us. And so if you can restrict what's being shown at any one time, people will be more likely to focus on that particular item and what you're talking about.
Perfect. This one's from Saif. It says, can you repeat again why you do not recommend that we do not say the agenda?
Yeah, so it really comes down to a couple of things. One is people remember stuff more if they see it. Second, from a validation standpoint, we want to make sure that we're asking the audience, is everything you wanted to see included, and or is everything relevant for you? It's a lot easier for them to do that and answer that question if they can see it on screen versus just trying to remember everything you just said over the last 30 to 60 seconds when you verbally described it.
Awesome. Okay, another one just came flying in from Pedro. Do you know any kind of measure to understand the effect of the presentation?
Wow. I don't. I guess my question would be, what type of effect are we looking for? Are we looking for how engaged the audience is, or are we looking for whether that relates to a win or loss in that deal or that demo? It's slightly ambiguous. I'm not entirely sure how to answer that.
Okay, well, we'll come back to that one. Maybe for another session. There we go. From mechanics point of view, this was in the chat. How do you refer back to the agenda slide without repeating or distracting from other slides / content shown on screen?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And my feedback for that is, and I see way too few people do this in demos, don't be afraid to pause your screen sharing. Either during the demo because you've got to fix something that didn't show up right, or when you've got to switch back and then switch to a different slide because it wasn't the last one you were on. Press pause, share the screen, continue talking while you're doing that, flip back into your deck, get to the right slide, and then resume share.
Love it. Michael's asking for your email one more time. Can we get that in chat?
We've
got lots of people who want
I'm gonna put it in the chat right now for everybody.
Okay. And while you do that, there was one question that I was selfishly wanting to get the answer from, and I think it was deleted. I don't see it in the Q&A anymore. But the question was, and I think it was deleted when you were talking about, hey, SCs should own the agenda slide. Well, what are the off chances when an AE is owning that slide? How do you try to get the reins from them and kind of have it be in your court instead of the AE's court?
Yeah, I mentioned it during the presentation, and I would reiterate, go see Chris White's presentation from yesterday. He does a lot of talk about the alignment between sales and pre-sales. There shouldn't ever be a situation where your sales rep is refusing to basically, take your advice about presenting your demo agenda slide. It's what you're going to present. If they're presenting the demo, by all means, go present that slide. But unless they're prepared to do that, they should absolutely be deferring to this. And I think I would just preface it the same way that I preface almost everything else in terms of advice that I tell SEs to give their account execs to work more effectively with them, which is by letting me do this, you're going to make me more successful and this demo more successful, which is going to make both of us more successful in terms of likely getting the win.
Love that. Okay, well, it's another plug. Chris White's session yesterday. Check it out. Okay, last question. This is from Brian here. What are your thoughts around showing only an agenda slide, then launching into a conversation / demo?
I'm not a huge fan of PowerPoint decks in a lot of cases. I think people spend way too much time talking about their company and themselves rather than focusing on the prospect. I would say if you're looking for a minimum deck, I would suggest 2 slides. The agenda slide, absolutely. I would almost always use a current situation slide as well as a way to sort of level set what we know about your problems and what you've told us, validate those situations first before you get into the agenda. So I'm a fan of minimizing, but I would use at least those 2 slides as a minimum.
Love it. Great. Well, Carrie, really appreciate this insight. Please, to the audience, if you feel so inclined, reach out, connect with Carrie if there's any other questions that you weren't able to get answers to today, but really appreciate your insights and all the knowledge that we gained from this session, Carrie.
Awesome.
Okay. Well, with that, let's go ahead and wrap up. We'll do a few little items here just to make sure, and I'm going to go in presenter mode off of best practices and make sure we do that. We want to remind everyone that each session you attend today will get you an entry into the raffle to win some awesome prizes. So stick around. Our last session today at 2 p.m. Mountain is where we're going to be raffling off those prizes. So check it out. You don't want to miss that session. It will be tons of fun. We're also excited to announce that we're going to be doing this in person around the globe, not just in the US, but we have other places around the globe. So find out where we're going to go. The last session will give you some more insight about where we plan on flying out to. Now, we also encourage you to stop by our expo hall to visit our premier partners of Demofest. And a reminder that there's no transfer of money involved in this event. So all of our partners have gone above and beyond to contribute to making this event a success for everyone. And now, the next sessions that we have up here, pick your favorite, and we hope to see you in that next session. And thank you again for attending our session today. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Thanks all.